Hello and welcome to When They Popped. I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Mary.
And welcome back to the When They Popped Book Club, everybody. Today we are discussing Over the Influence by Joanna, aka Jojo Levesque. So many of us know Jojo from her debut single, Leave, Get Out, in parentheses.
Get out, leave right now. It's the end of you and me. It's too late and I can't wait for you to be gone.
And her subsequent hits like Baby It's You,
You ain't got to buy nothing. It's not what I want. Baby, it's you. We don't have to go nowhere. It's not what I want. Baby, it's you.
and Too Little Too Late.
It's just too little too late, a little too wrong. And I can't wait for you to all the right things to say. You know it's just too little too late.
But after becoming basically an overnight sensation at just the age of 13, Jojo seemingly disappeared from the airwaves, from the celebrity scene, and it felt like we never really heard from her again. And in the 2010s, news started trickling out that Jojo was basically stuck in a bad contract with her record label, and they wouldn't allow her to release new music. So this book has been long awaited by so many of us millennials because it finally peels back the curtain on what that experience was like for Jojo, what it was like being held hostage by a bad contract, basically, while wanting so desperately to create new music and connect with her fans. But this book also covers so much more. This is a super vulnerable and honestly, at times, it's a very difficult to read story of Jojo's life. How she went from being a kid who got bullied very badly in Foxborough, Massachusetts, to dealing with her parents' addictions to substances and alcohol, and how she struggled with many of those things herself, and finally found her own voice and learned to trust herself. So this is a book about resilience, overcoming loss, addiction, learning to listen to that voice inside your head and trust it. So let's talk about it. So first, let's tackle the more technical aspect of the book, which is what I was most curious about when we selected this as our book club pick. Jojo's struggle for creative freedom and ownership of her own voice. So, Mary, as our resident lawyer, can you please explain how the F Jojo was held hostage by her label for 10 years? Was it 10 years?
I think 10 years.
10
Yes,
years. That's a decade.
I know. And I'm going to try to give the Spark Notes version. This is a book club episode, you guys, so it's a little unhinged. It's a little unedited. It's a little off the seat of our pants, but we're really excited to talk about it, so bear with me. But basically, Jojo signed with Blackground Records at the age of 12. Think of what you were doing at 12. Certainly not signing life-changing record deals. And in the beginning, it seems like Jojo and her family had really good vibes with the people at Blackground Records. She was wooed by the CEO of that label, Barry Hankerson. Notably, he is the late, great Aaliyah's uncle. And she had an incredible creative partnership, brother-sister relationship with the main producer. It seemed she worked with Vincent Herbert. More on that later. And to be fair, they and she had great success at Blackground Records in the beginning. I mean, think of her mega hits. And when she signed with them, she had signed a 7-album deal. But I mean, when it comes to it, and signing with that label, or probably with most labels at that time, they owned her voice. Like, think about that. Anything she put her voice on, they owned. And something I learned a bit about in this book, kind of the business behind record labels, these labels need to sign distribution deals with other companies to actually get music out and distributed, if you will. And at this time, Background had signed a distribution deal with Universal, which is, a big name. And Universal was fortunately very excited about the idea of a new female artist like Jojo, one who kind of straddled this line of pop and R&B. And that is actually a big subject in this book, just kind of what genre and style of music Jojo was supposed to have. As time went on, however, Blackground lost their distribution rights with Universal, but then they signed another deal with Interscope, but then they lost it with Interscope, and it was a super unstable time at that label, and it just kept delaying and pushing back her projects. Each of these different distributors also seemed to have different ideas and opinions of who Jojo, the artist, was and was messing majorly with her head and creative process. In fact, for a while, it didn't really seem that she had much say at all in who she was as an artist and what she put out. And something that becomes very clear in the book is that she's an artiste, and not having this creative freedom and say was literally like killing her, I would say, just sending her down a dark path. So basically, by now, it's 2013. She hasn't put out a record in 7 years. And trust me, the girl wants to put out records. It's no fault of her own, but her label is literally not allowing her to do so. So she hired some lawyers, and when it comes down to it, a record contract is a service agreement, a personal service agreement. And her obligation under this agreement, this contract, is to put out records. However, the label wasn't exercising the next album of her contract. They were not facilitating and supporting her in making a new album. As a result, she was continuously unable to fulfill her side of the agreement and complete the contract. She was being held prisoner, literally. So to, in effect, get this contract dropped through this legal avenue, Jojo would have had to declare bankruptcy. And basically, when you declare bankruptcy under this umbrella, you're saying, I can't earn money outside of this contract because she's not allowed to work under the contract. And if the court sided with her, it would have cleared her obligation to perform under this contract. However, Jo said no to this. And she talked about growing up in a blue-collar family and just the stigma and what comes with, declaring bankruptcy. She just was worrying what people would think back home when they heard that, what they would say. And it goes a lot to, I think, her upbringing. And looking back now, I mean, she gets it's like a legal maneuver. But at the time, she could just not fathom filing for bankruptcy.
That's something that I really loved about this book is how, she does a really good job conveying what it felt like in the moment, but how she's come to peace with everything. I just felt so honest, and you can tell she's in therapy. She talks a lot about being in therapy and how much it's helped her, but she's just so honest about the way she felt in the moment. And maybe I listened to the audiobook and she narrates it and she does a fantastic job, but it really was surprising to me and really refreshing how honest she was about how she felt at the time. I don't know many people who would openly admit that they made, unsound business decisions because they were worried about what other people would think about them. She talks a lot about how her manager would always tell her perception is reality and how these ideas really steeped into her head. And I think, again, she was being influenced from such a young age. Now she's able to look back and sort of unpack a lot of that for us as the reader or the listener. And I thought that was a really great example of wouldn't you want to do anything possible to break free of this prison that you're it's literally ruining your life. You're turning to alcohol and other substances to drown out your feelings about how upset you are by this whole situation. But she was like, I just could not bring myself to do it. I just thought it was so refreshing and honest.
She's so, this book is ugly, as you said, and she has done things in her life that are not pretty, and she just seems so self-aware now and is able to reflect on her journey, reflect on her mistakes, and, like you said, understand why, and seemingly has kind of learned and took her voice back and took her power back. And it was really a powerful read. But sorry for the mini tangent. So she's like, nope, we're not doing bankruptcy. And the lawyers are like, all right, well, this is an ironclad, contract, but we're going to spend some time trying to find some sort of loophole here. So eventually they probably put all their interns on it and they were able to find.
Is that what it's like?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Some law school intern was probably going through all the case law and the contract and trying to find something for the partners. But they found a loophole in New York law eventually where it says you can't hold a minor to a personal service contract, which she was in, for longer than 7 years. So she was a minor. She signed at 12 years old. And At this time, she had been in this contract for 10 years. So, bingo, she was free. This contract with Blackground was completely null and void.
This part shocked me, Mary. I almost fell out of my seat because as a woman in STEM, I can do the math. She was in this contract for 10 years, feeling this way, being told no every time she brought them an opportunity she wanted to explore, a style, a song she wanted to release. I have this stat. Oh my God, what did she say? She said she recorded over like 200 songs between the ages of 19 and 24. Like, where are they? Release
Oh,
the song.
there's some really good ones on YouTube that I like. When I was in college, I used to illegally rip off YouTube, like Keep On Forgetting to Forget About You.
I remember every word that you said. It'll just keep spinning and running in my head. But it don't matter what I try to do. I keep on forgetting to forget about you.
And she would bring them like straight to the people on MySpace
Yes.
for free because that was the only way she could get her art out into the world. So to hear that she was in this contract for 10 years, but she only needed to be in it for 7, I was like, how did they not find this 3 years sooner? Like, I feel like everyone kind of failed her.
And like, that's a thing where she didn't enlist legal help till 2013.
Right. Like she waited a very long time until exploring it, but it just kills me.
I
Like,
know.
I'm sure it killed her too, knowing she lost
3
3
years.
years.
And it gets better, but it's still a bit of a bumpy road. So 2013, she's freed from this personal service agreement. And in 2014, she signs with Atlantic Records and gets really close, like creatively close, I feel like, with this A&R guy there named Aaron Bay Shuck. And I got the sense that she really felt close to him and established a great relationship with him. And 4 months after signing with Atlantic, Aaron got a huge job offer. He was just an A&R guy there, but to be the president of A&R at Interscope, which is obviously a huge career move for him, which Jojo conceded, and she stayed at Atlantic and she put out Mad Love, but by the end of that, asked to be released from her contract so she could follow Aaron to Interscope. Again, banking on the relationship and these creative vibes that they had established, which again, I think is worth noting because something we learn in this book is most of the people at the labels, besides Vincent for some time, Aaron, I'm sure there were people that she did vibe with, but a lot of them she did not seemingly creatively vibe with. And that may have been the higher ups at the label, but they wanted her to just be very manufactured and fit into a specific box, like a pop girl or an R&B girl. And they were not super interested in what she was wanting or feeling creatively. And I mean, she is not that kind of artist that you can just put a sticker on and be like, you're a pop girl. Like she has so much creative energy coming out of her pores. She's such an artist that it makes sense that she wanted to follow Aaron, someone that she felt kind of got that. Anyway, so then 1 month into recording her next album at Interscope, it was announced that Aaron was going to leave to become the CEO of Warner Records.
This is when I lost all patience with her.
I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Hitching her wagon to him and he keeps
I
like leaving
know.
her behind.
And I think she has mixed feelings about it because, again, I think she feels very strongly about him and them together, but at the same time is, worried about just following this man around. But her manager's really pushing her, and that's something we kind of learned, that JoJo's got into this industry at such a young age. She's so used to adults telling her what to do, what's best for her, and something that she has to kind of discover and break free in this journey of her life is just like, eventually she's the adult and she needs to, decide what's right for her and make her own decisions and not listen to these like yes people or people who are seeing a check at the end of the tunnel, of pushing her in one direction. So I think she had some hesitations about following him again. I mean, mind you, she had just went with Aaron to Interscope. She had even created her own imprint there, Clover Records at Interscope. But at the urging of her manager, and again, keeping this now strained faith in Aaron, JoJo went over to Warner with him. Mind you, by now it's 2018 and streaming is most definitely a thing. And what people started to notice was none of JoJo's masters that Blackground owned. Remember Blackground? Specifically, her first 2 albums were found anywhere. They could not be found anywhere on the streaming services. And the word around town was Barry, that Blackground CEO who originally signed JoJo, he was holding out and not putting masters on streaming because he wanted to make his own platform a la Tidal. And JoJo's kind of like, no one's going to buy that, you idiot. She wrote to him.
She's like, no one's going to pay for your service, idiot. I loved that so much. That was another part where listening to the audiobook was really fun because
yeah.
sometimes when she says these things, she has such like venom in her voice,
Yeah, you
and
can
it's very
tell.
funny.
She's a firecracker. She's hilarious. I listened to half of it in audiobook, so I got a little bit of taste of that. So she's, again, kind of being held hostage. She's got out of this contract. She's been playing musical chairs with record labels, trying to find her footing, her sound, who she was, not who she was being told to be, but who she was as an artist. And then everybody's like in her DMs, like, JoJo, why isn't Too Little Too Late on Spotify? Anything from her first 2 albums. And her manager, which we'll talk about in a little bit, for all her faults, she was also had positives about her too, but she had the idea that JoJo should re-record her masters. And literally, to our knowledge, to JoJo's knowledge, no artist had done this before. And she truly started a revolution. She enlisted friends who were producers that were willing to help her kind of recreate the original sound of her songs as close as she could get. And then she was able to reapproach them with her new mature voice. And it was so funny. She said she hadn't listened to those songs in nearly a decade, like listened to those albums all the way through. And just how much more she related to the subject matter of those first 2 albums as a girl in her 20s, been through heartbreak, been through relationships, hurt, all that, than she did when she was 12.
Yeah, I think she said, like, I had never even kissed a boy when I was singing Leave, Get Out. And like, I know we're going to talk about that song because she shared so many fun gems about it in the music video. But this was shocking to me. I feel like I remember seeing some of this in the headlines about how she was re-releasing some of her own music. And she did mention Taylor Swift a couple times in the book. And she was like, I was really happy that Taylor was able to do, the same thing for herself and like reclaim her own voice because she could really relate to what that feels like. She did mention Taylor in another story too, Segue, which I thought was so hilarious. So, as you can imagine, JoJo has brushed shoulders with so many celebrities. She mentions Ashley Parker Angel, Usher, like she just like casually name drops a lot of people. And she mentioned how she met Selena Gomez and they became close. And Selena invited her, JoJo, to Taylor Swift's Valentine's Day party one year. And Taylor had an activity for Valentine's Day where everyone took a photo, like a little Polaroid, they'd put it on a piece of paper, and this little activity to write down your best qualities, your worst qualities, and why you think you're single. And I literally screamed. I just thought that was so hilarious and like
So funny.
so Taylor.
Yep.
I just thought it was the funniest thing ever. It just was like a sweet moment. And JoJo mentions that her experience as she got older, being a woman in music and being friends with Selena and hanging out with Taylor, it was not like the Y2K era we grew up in where female artists were pitted against each other. And she would talk about how much she was inspired by Britney and how much she also loved Christina, but how the media made us believe you kind of had to pick one, kind of like the NSYNC versus Backstreet Boys. You can't like everyone, you have to pick a team. So I thought it was really interesting to hear it from, we know what it's like as fans, but to hear her own perspective as the artist, I just thought it was very cool.
I also appreciated, this is so Taylor too, the one thing she mentioned, how like when she met Taylor at the party, they had a great conversation. She was so nice. And she's like, she like was mentioning like some of my deep cuts, like Taylor does her research. I think she listens to a lot of music, knows a lot of artists' deep cuts. And it's just like, of course, Taylor knows that.
Right. What JoJo revealed in this book is that she struggled so much with her own self-image and confidence and never feeling like she was enough. She grew up being bullied because she was too much. She was a performer. She made really crazy eye contact with adults and was so focused on becoming a star that everyone was like, shut up, JoJo. But then when she was famous, she wasn't enough. She wasn't big enough, skinny enough, sexy enough. And I'm sure getting recognition from an artist like Taylor Swift just must have felt really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well deserved.
Well deserved. So obviously there's so much that Jojo reveals in this book as we follow her rise to fame. And of course, the impending crash down when she basically was silenced. Insert Oprah, were you silent or silenced?
Were you silent or were you silenced?
She was silenced. So Mary and I each picked a few moments that stood out to us most so that we can sort of touch on the bigger things that we found surprising or that we learned. So, Mary, do you want to get us started with one thing that stood out to you most?
Sure. And I mean, I'd love for you to jump in here as well, because this first one's some big topics, but
Yeah.
a lot of time in this book is spent on the dynamic with her mother, her father, their addiction journeys, and also infidelity and, honesty. And both of her parents were very musical. You learn kind of she gets different elements of her vocal talents from her parents. Her mother was very by the book and vocally proper. Her dad was teaching her all these different ways she could manipulate her voice. And her parents met in AA, I believe. They both struggled her whole time in this book with addiction. Her mom basically is the one who brought her out to LA, that let her pursue her career. And there were a lot of moments reading this, I was like, wow, she has a really good mom. Like her mom really cared about her, supported her dreams, did anything she could to make ends meet. There definitely was like a turn in their relationship because her mom was her manager in the beginning of her career, like when she signed with Blackground, and her mom doesn't know, the ins and
Right.
outs of the music industry, contracts,
Yeah.
what the right step is. But they were kind of, it was like Jojo said, like us against the world, they were in it together. As Jojo started to take off and, was touring, her mom, it seemingly started to fall back into her addiction a bit. And their relationship got very toxic. And, part of that might be just teenage girl and mother, that's definitely a thing. But I wondered partially if her mom was almost jealous of JoJo's success. Her mom was a very talented singer, but never went anywhere. Some of the stories, I just wondered if there was kind of a jealous or a regret element coming from her mom. Obviously, that's just speculating as the reader. Could not be true at all. Or if it's just, her mom also struggled with mental health issues. And there were stories of threatened suicide and multiple times, which really took a toll on JoJo's own mental health because she was worrying and carried a lot of the blame for how her mom was feeling. And it was just, very heavy. At the same time, her father was back in Massachusetts for most of the time and was just really into narcotics by the sound of it. And it was kind of sad because she had so many fond memories with her dad, but she just sounded like every time she saw him, he was just kind of getting worse and worse. And those relationships, those up and downs really seemed to take a toll on her. What were your thoughts on those?
Um, I'll address the dad stuff first. I sobbed like
Yeah.
listening to this. Her dad eventually overdoses, and it's really hard to listen to. Anytime a young child is parentified and sort of put in a position where they are kind of like the adult and like taking care of their parent it's just really sad. But I will say, I think listening to her retell this story, she has so much empathy for both
Mm.
of her parents. Mary, as you mentioned, her parents met in AA. Her dad was addicted to opioids and her mom was an alcoholic, but her dad just preferred the AA style. And they would bring Jojo as a little kid to these meetings with them. So she was exposed very early onto, what redemption looks like, and hearing some of these very difficult, very mature stories at a young age. And I feel she has a lot of empathy for her dad, and it doesn't seem like she has any resentment towards him. And I think that's
Mhm.
something that a lot of people struggle with. If you've ever known anyone who struggles with addiction, it can be very easy to be like, just get over it. Like, just stop. Like, you're hurting
Yeah.
everyone around you, but it's not that black and white. And I feel like she handles it with such grace and nuance. And I mean, clearly her therapy is working. Like, drop the name
Oh,
of your therapist,
she
girl.
does. She does. She's
She
in there.
and it's just so it really I think just goes to show how much she loves her parents, and she knows that they did the best that they could, and she doesn't hold their faults against them. But it's almost like a very she was just very factual in retelling, it is what it is. And it seems like she has had time to process a lot of the emotions that went along with it. But her dad was definitely a really tough listen. And pivoting to her mom, you're right. Her mom was in a really tough position. She was a house cleaner. She was supporting Jojo on less than $10,000 a year in Foxborough, Massachusetts. And she was doing the best she could. And she had this precocious, as Jojo called herself, daughter who wanted to be a star. And she would support her. She was in some commercials. She was on like Kids Say the Darndest Things or like America's Most Talented Kids. And when it finally got to this pinnacle where her mom was like, okay, Jojo could, have a future as a star. She has this little kid chirping in her ear, like, we need to go to LA. We need to go to LA. We need to go to LA. And finally her mom was like, okay, we'll go to LA. And you can almost hear in Jojo's retelling of this story that now as an adult, she looks back and she's like, why did I have that much power as a 10-year-old kid?
Right.
Why was I able to convince my mom to move across the country without knowing anyone and like pursue this career? But on the other hand, you're a mom and you want your kid to be happy. And she's hearing her 10-year-old daughter getting bullied at school, not having many friends, and saying, Mom, I'm going to die if I don't leave Foxborough, Massachusetts. So like, I felt a lot of empathy towards her mom. And you mentioned that she was her manager. And this was at the advice of someone from the label. I cannot remember. They had like a manager at first. And
Yes, who, after she lost one of those contest shows, that
yes.
approached them.
So she lost America's Most Talented Kids to a cellist, a girl who was playing the cello. And Jojo was absolutely devastated. And there was a guy in the audience. What was his name? I cannot find it.
But he was someone famous or had a famous relative.
They all had famous relatives.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny. But he approached Jojo and her mom and he was like, listen, I'll be your manager. I'll help set you up with some gigs and stuff. His name was James. And eventually Jojo's mom was counseled by Barry, so the Black Ground record label owner Barry, to cut James out as the manager and have Jojo's mom become Jojo's manager directly. I wonder if this was a calculated move by Barry because he knew that Jojo's mom was very inexperienced and he could take advantage of a young artist. He knew what he was doing by removing somebody who at least had some wherewithal, in the industry. And her mom had no idea what she was doing, but she also acknowledges that she never asked for help. And Jojo said that she had talked to her mom since, and she was like, how did you do this? Like, and why did you do this? And her mom said that she didn't want to feel stupid. So while she was signing these contracts on behalf of Jojo as her manager, she didn't understand one lick of the industry language, but she didn't want to feel dumb. And she didn't want to make it seem like they were inexperienced by having to ask questions. And Jojo does not hold this against her mom whatsoever. She has so much empathy for her. And I just thought that was a really beautiful thing. And you mentioned that you felt maybe there was some jealousy going on, but I think it was really the push and pull of the power dynamics of their relationship changing. So Jojo lost out on a lot of opportunities because her mom was trying to be a mom and a manager at the same time. She mentions this one story where she lost out on a gig because they were all back-to-backs. She had to be in New York one day to be on TRL. Then the next day she had to be in LA for a photo shoot. Then back in New York the next day for a music video shoot. And her mom put her foot down. She's like, no, you need to do your schoolwork, work with your tutor. And unless they want to pay for you to be on a private jet, because that's when you can actually sleep and focus and do your work, then I'm going to say no to some of these opportunities. And Jojo was like pissed that her mom was saying no to some of these moments. And I know there's one in particular, Mary, that you want to talk about.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of the tension in their relationship was that Jojo realizes at 13, like, I'm the one who's bankrolling our life, so I'm the one who should get to call the shots.
Yeah.
And I mean, what leverage do you have as a parent aside from you're 13 years old? Like, the power dynamics that just are so crazy. And again, she just understands, she empathizes with her mom. She has a lot of compassion there. But I think she also was surprised by how much power she was given as a young kid, but then also being really upset when her mom would exercise her own power as her guardian.
There is a quote I want to read on that note before moving to this story that I'd like to share. She says, "There wasn't much discipline or routine to be found. Now, as an adult, I wish someone had given me some structure, or at least taught me how to function in society, how to clean or fold laundry. I didn't know where to turn to do my taxes, and I couldn't even mail a letter for myself. Someone had always sent off fan mail responses I'd written out. How was I supposed to instinctively know how to form good habits at this point? I felt like it was too late, and I was angry at my parents for not teaching me for whatever reason. But I knew that holding anyone but me accountable was unfair and a waste of energy, so I doubled down on blaming myself." So, as you said, she really doesn't blame her parents. Understand this was a really unique situation that no one knows how to navigate, but at the same time is kind of feeding into this cycle that she was in at this point of her life of just almost like self-loathing. She went through a really, dark period, I think, when she was being held prisoner and creatively stifled, where she was really in a dark place, I would say. But let's talk about one of the most infamous times where her mom did indeed say no. And everybody's talking about the Christina story, and that's making headlines this week, where she talks about Christina being rude at TRL. She doesn't name Christina, but she gives hints that makes it very obvious that it is Christina. And so I'm going to tell the Britney story, which is, of course, a perfect and amazing because she's never anything but an angel to anybody.
I squealed
I
when she
know.
mentioned. I was like, Mary's gonna love this.
And we knew, I think we talked about it in another episode that she did almost signed with Britney, but we didn't really know the background story as to what happened. But she was at a concert in Mansfield, Massachusetts, and there was a summer jam type concert, and Britney was performing. And she went with her mom, and she happened to run into this girl that was basically her first PR person when she was like doing little shows as a kid. This was in 1999. So she was super young. She was like 9 years old, 10 years old, very young. Oh, excuse me. I found my 8-year-old self. It says 8-year-old in the book. So
Mary has it open, by the way. It's very funny.
I did underlines. I did notes in the margins.
Hardcover. She sprung for the hardcover.
They weren't selling a soft cover. So basically, they were like, you need to go backstage. You need to meet Britney. Britney's here. And she basically sang her way backstage. Like there was a first line of security where she just went up and sang, and he's like, "Oh, you sound pretty good." And called the next line of security back that was like, "Hey, can she go backstage? Like, listen to her sing." Finally, she gets to Big Rob, which is like the final line of security to Britney. And
Rob is her personal security guard.
yes, and Big Rob, I mean, he's with the Jonas Brothers. Big Rob is
Rob for real.
Yeah, he's a figure all in himself. And she says, "I sang for Rob. He dug it. And he essentially peeled back the velvet rope to Britney's bare bones dressing room, where she was a self-illuminated object of focus at the center of her dancers. I was in awe of being that up close to her after seeing her performing on stage earlier. And I geeked out when I spotted her iconic head mic on a small table in there. At 17, she was in a totally different age group than me, and to my 8-year-old self, she seemed savvy and wise. Maybe it's a Sagittarius thing. She was sweet and curious as to who this little girl with a missing tooth and a Boston accent dressed like a hippie rocker was in her dressing room. I asked if I could sing for her, and she patiently gave me the floor. So I sang Respect by Aretha Franklin. She put her hands up to her cheeks and dropped her mouth. Oh my God, she drawled in that Louisiana twang I had heard so much of on MTV. There was all this commotion around me. The dancers took pictures and asked me to sing again, this time filming it with the latest tech, a handheld camcorder. Her whole team made their way into the dressing room and just kept cheering me on. A few got close to Mom and asked her questions in hushed tones. I put in the notes, Larry? ? I was so proud of myself. These performers in their cargo pants and tube tops were so cool, and my talent had softened their energy towards me, so much that I now felt accepted and welcomed, like we were kin. Britney said out loud to the room that she was just about to start a production company of her own, and maybe we could do something together someday. And then she goes on to say, Months later, just before my 9th birthday, we received a contract from the offices of Britney's attorney, Larry Rudolph, outlining a deal that would make me her first signing. I was eager to get going, but Mom took time to process it and think about what it would really mean to let her child, who hadn't even hit double digits yet, start making an album. She respectfully declined, and I was convinced that she was actively ruining my life. And I mean, if that was me, I probably would have blown up my house. Like, honest. Like, I don't, like, I would have, seems pretty, like, she doesn't make it seem like she's that dramatic, but holy cow. Holy cow.
So, like, again, it's like her mom is like, her mom is like, I was being very.
Kelsey just sent me a picture of our recording session. We can see each other, but I'm holding this book up over my face to read it, and you can't even.
It literally looks like there's just a floating book, and I'm talking to no one. It's so funny. Okay. Anyways, like, but that's an example of like her mom was trying to be a mom.
Yeah.
And trying to put her foot down and trying to put her daughter's best interests first. And she thought the most important thing for her was to stay in school and get an education.
Despite everything, I wonder if that even was maybe the right decision. Like, we never really heard much of like Britney doing anything with artists under her production company. So I'm wondering if Jojo had signed, like maybe like nothing would have come. You know, it's hard to know.
And I hate to say this, but like everything happens for a reason. Like who knows what direction she would have gone in if she was under Britney instead of, you know, Blackground. Who knows? Should we get into Leave, Get Out? She shared so much good juice about the making of this song and the music video.
Yes. Let's talk about Leave, Get Out. I'm going to read some passages from the book. Goodbye, Kelsey. You will no longer be able to see me. So, Mom and I were flown back to LA to work with some producers out there. I'm going to have to see what I look like. Hold on. It's just... what does it look like, Kelsey?
It looks
narrate it. Looks like what?
It literally looks like I'm talking to a floating book. And it's so funny. Oh my God. We have the giggles. It's early on a Saturday morning. It's 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning.
Yes. We wanted to make sure we had time to read the book and decompress. So let me and my floating book try again. So Mom and I were flown back to LA to work with some producers out there. One of the sessions was with 2 Danish hitmakers. Obviously, my interest was piqued immediately. Their names were Scholschak and Carlin, who Barry felt had a song for me. And the song that Barry wanted me to cut was called Leave, Get Out. After listening to the demo, I didn't get it. Neither did Mom. The song sounded a bit formulaic and low-key, void of the edgier sound we'd been making in New York. How would this song even fit on the album, which is fully centered around R&B and hip-hop? And she talks a bit about the Swedish producers, how they kind of like taught her how to get the headphones on over her ears and adjusting the mic, you know, cute little background stories. And I found this was very interesting how they kind of cut songs. She said, we started with the chorus and then worked our way backwards to the verses and bridge. These producers had a particular way of cutting vocals that was different from the ways I'd worked in the past. They would have me sing the song down once or twice, and then sing it in pieces, and then sing line by line over and over again. They would take the best lines or words or syllables and Frankenstein it all together in whatever way they deemed best for the song. She said it took like 10 hours just to, you know, do this with this track. And then she said, though I initially wasn't too hot on the song, it started to grow on me the more I sang it. It had energy and angst, which I appreciated and somehow resonated with, even though the subject matter was much more situated for someone who had actually been in a relationship before. But I'd never wanted to be young anyways. We spent the day getting my delivery right, poppy and punchy, memorable. I also learned how to use what they called vocal fry at the beginning of words for added effect. And then she tells how one of the producers, he kind of got her to do those background parts of like, leave, get out, leave. Right now, now.
Waste of time.
He was like, I want you to scream those words in between the lines of the chorus. And it definitely gives it some added dimension. And she goes, I couldn't help giggling because his accent was funny and I loved how excited he was about it. But it felt wrong yelling like that. Mom always warned me not to yell because I could ruin my voice. But it felt kind of fun to freak out and play a different character. After we finished recording for the day, Mom and I left the studio, not giving it a second thought. Like, they didn't even think the song was gonna, make the album, more or less, because it didn't fit cohesively with the vibe.
She said she literally forgot about it after that. Also, side note, the Scandinavian producer part, it's very funny in the audiobook because she does their accent. So that part made me lol. But she says that they really wanted Baby It's You to be her first single because it felt more like her style and everyone loved it. And she could not understand why the label came back months later saying Leave was going to be the debut single. Jojo said she cried. She was so upset. And they basically forgot about that the song even existed because they were so excited about the other music that she had. So what I thought was so fascinating was when they were promoting the song, the label sent out the physical single CDs to radio, and Jojo said that they did not include a photo of her on the album art because she looked so young, and they didn't want that to be a factor in whether or not she got airplay. And I thought that was so diabolical, but also so genius, because I remember when that song came out, we were all like, wait, who is this little baby girl singing this mature song, but also with this mature voice and these amazing vocal runs and this power?
Yeah.
And this is around the time when Jojo says how she felt, quote, inconvenienced by her youth. She just felt so young. And she was immediately partnered with Lorianne Gibson, the iconic choreographer who was telling her to drink the milk and teaching her how to perform, because it was just this whirlwind of suddenly Jojo's everywhere and Leave is everywhere. She recalled a photo shoot that she did with Sierra where Jojo felt, quote, stumpy and infantile next to her. And, she's 13 years old doing promotions and performing alongside these other young stars, but they're like 17, 18 years old. And a 12-year-old does not have anything in common with a 17-year-old. Like, they just don't. And she talks a lot about how difficult it was to sort of overcome that. I also loved the stories that she told about the music video.
Yes.
She said that she really had to fight to have a Latino actor as her love interest in the music video. She said the label originally brought in, quote, 1 million Aaron Carter lookalikes to be her love interest. We know Mary would have been very excited by that. But she was like, why can't I have anyone of color be my love interest? And this becomes a theme sort of throughout Jojo's rise to stardom. She dates a Black man, and her label's like, that's a bad look. And she talks a lot about how she was discouraged from being as inclusive as she was in her real life, in her public persona. And I thought that was also a really interesting perspective. She said, filming the music video, she channeled every ounce of attitude she had, but she still felt like a little kid on the first day of school. And she was just faking it till she makes it. She shared this one story where she gets to stuff her bra in one scene because she felt like a little kid, and she felt like she looked like a little kid, and she just wanted to feel more adult. And who doesn't remember wanting to, be older? But it was very also sad to hear that.
Yeah.
No little kid should want to rush through that precious time.
Oh, I know. And then it debuted on TRL, and she just thought about all of her friends in middle school, not her friends, all the people, the haters that had bullied her growing up and who would be glued to their TV watching her gagged. Like, damn, I really should have been nicer to her. And I love this. She goes, and what were all these girls back home doing now? Sucking dick in the back of a beat-up Ford Focus in the St. Mary's parking lot? I had heard all kinds of rumors about the kids who'd made my life hell back in Massachusetts, and it was so satisfying to think of the distance between where they were and where I was in that moment.
Oh my God, I loved when she would read them to Phil. So obviously Leave Get Out was such a huge success. She said she was the youngest solo artist to ever reach #1 on the charts. And they celebrated, she was on tour opening for Usher at the time. And they celebrated by eating pizza in her hotel room in London with her mom. And she said this quote that just like gagged me. She said, quote, "I was now officially a part of an elite club of successful chart-topping artists all before I got my period."
That
Like,
was a good one. That was a good one.
holy shit, though. Like, and then her whole world just opened up to her. And her first single, I mean, what does that do to your psyche as a little kid?
I'm just glad she has a good therapist.
She's clearly gone through a lot of it. So one of the parts that stood out to me was I would like to talk about Vincent Herbert. So Vincent Herbert, you mentioned, Mary, was one of her earliest cheerleaders. He partnered with her. That was interesting. He introduced himself as 23 years old when he was actually 33 years old to Jojo and her mom.
I know. She did. She would play a lot with age too. She'd be like, "How old do you think I am?" And then someone would guess like 16 and she'd be like, "Oh, close." There was a lot of toying around with age around her, it seemed like.
Right. And I think as adults in the industry, trying to come off as approachable and trustworthy and, you know, I can relate to you. Like, you should trust your career with me. But Vincent Herbert was by her side for so much of the beginning of her career. And you'll remember Vincent Herbert if you listen to our Lady Gaga episode. Lady Gaga credits Vincent with discovering her.
Yeah.
Well, Vincent also was credited by Jojo for giving her the nickname Jojo. He was like, Joanna Levesque. He was like, how about just Jojo? And it stuck. And he was with her from the very beginning. She trusted him a lot, but things between Vincent and Barry started getting sour. And he basically just like kind of picked up and never spoke to Jojo again and went on to work with other artists. And I think Jojo felt very betrayed and, you know, abandoned by this guy who was with her from the very beginning, who she really trusted. And so much of Jojo's struggle is that she feels trapped in this bad contract, right? While the industry is still moving around her and people, new artists are coming up out of nowhere and becoming more famous than even she was with her hit single, like Lady Gaga, for example. And I feel like this just added to her anxiety and her feelings like she's not enough.
Yeah.
And that she's stuck in this stalemate position while Vincent is moving on and working with these other artists. And she said something that really broke my heart. She was like, this is the man who promised to buy me my first car when I turned 16 and go car shopping with me. And now he's not even texting me on my birthday. And I don't hold that against Vincent, and she doesn't either. She like understands that it was business. But I think when you're that young, it's really difficult to separate those two things.
I also just think he should have handled it better, like differently.
Agree.
Like,
It's a little kid and her mom who has no idea like what they're doing. Like, I get it if you have issues with Barry and the record label, but like, don't take it out on a little girl.
He still could have had a relationship with her, I think, and didn't have to just like go cold turkey on her like that. It was kind of unnecessarily cruel.
It was pretty cruel. There's one other thing that stood out to me, and I feel like we talked a lot about this previously, but just in general, her honesty and humility and what it was like after reaching this insane success as 13 years old, being everywhere, being the top of TRL, the top of the charts, and then trying to get back into the scene once she was ready to release new music and perform live again. And she was asked to open for Demi Lovato and the Jonas Brothers, and she turned it down because she was embarrassed. She was like, I just could not stomach being an opener for Demi Lovato. And even though they're wonderful and I love them and I would see Jonas Brothers all the time on TRL, she did finally agree to open for Fifth Harmony. But even then, she was like, it was embarrassing knowing that these young girls who were younger than me, who had not been in the industry as long as I had, were selling out arenas and I couldn't. You know, she had all of this fame and success right out of the gate, and to be an opening act was really hard on her ego. But I just love that she did not dance around those ugly parts of herself. She just came right out with it and said it. And she was like, listen, my ego was bruised, but I frickin' did it. And like, I knew that's what it would take. Similarly with The Masked Singer, she talked about that experience, which I thought was so funny. She was like, it was kind of crazy that I am on this show where the judges, quote, pretend to not know who I am under this mesh mask. But she said that this was also a really valuable opportunity for her because she just kind of leaned into it. She thought it was funny. But she said that the vocal coach that she worked with on this show reignited some of the quote vocal fire in her and taught her some new techniques and just made her excited to sing again. So I thought that was a fun little lesson in there, that something on its face may not seem like what you want to be doing exactly, but there can still be something really valuable that comes from it.
Oh, for sure. I also wanted to talk to you about her manager. Could we talk about the manager for a second?
MM, as she calls her.
Yeah, either MM or my manager as like a title. She never names this person. And this manager was with Jojo for I don't know how long, but a very long time. And she was kind of brought in, I believe, to be kind of a buffer for Jojo and her mom because they were really having toxic fights. They had gone to blows in a hotel lobby. They were fighting. It was not good. And MM kind of eventually took over for her mom as the manager and was with Jojo through a lot of it, through ups and downs, was a really important good factor in her life, but also kind of terrible. It sounded like at the same time, like I'm curious as your interpretation, like, and I just found it very interesting because they did eventually split ways. It, was almost like a breakup. She referred to MM as like a quasi mother. And I think there was some tension between her actual mother and MM because she was like, she's going to try to replace me. And she kind of did. And what are your thoughts?
To me, I felt like her manager seemed to side with the labels more than she would stand up for Jojo as an artist. And that's where a lot of this tension was when Jojo was stuck in this weird limbo and the labels were not agreeing with the direction that she wanted to take. If they felt like she was going too R&B and not enough pop, her manager was really backing the label more than
Yeah.
Jojo. And she said something really interesting in one passage about how they kind of felt like they owed it to each other and themselves to stick
Stick it
together
out.
in this
Yeah.
dysfunctional relationship and professional arrangement because they'd been through so much together. Like they needed to make it to the other side together to show that it wasn't all in vain. And I feel like that's how a lot of toxic relationships go. People think that however long you've been in the relationship has any bearing on if you should stay in it. Like, oh, well, we've already made it this far. We've been together for 7 years or 10 years. Like, I can't just walk away now. And it's like, yes, you can. Like the duration, the length of your relationship should not be a deciding factor of whether you stay in it or not. And I think that's true for professional arrangements also. You can be grateful that you've been through so much together, but when something isn't working, sometimes you just got to cut bait and move on. And that was something that was very difficult. Jojo said she had to write a letter to MM and read it out loud to her
Yeah.
because she needed to be sure that she wasn't going to chicken out because there were just so many emotions wrapped up in it. And she was someone who guided her through the most tenuous times in her life. And she was there when her dad died. She was there through so many personal experiences where it can be really difficult to untangle your personal feelings for someone and your professional goals.
And she also was there when she put her on a 500 a day calorie diet.
Yeah, that was fucked up. Jojo mentioned a lot of things that her manager would say to her and sort of like putting her down and like always ribbing her, like wanting to be her stylist and changing her image. And I think just trying to control Jojo in a way that Jojo was not comfortable with. And there's a lot of body image issues in this book. So if that's something that you struggle with or like feel triggered by, I would not recommend reading this at all. There was one story in particular where Jojo said, I was a size 2, maybe a size 4 on a day where I felt a little bloated. And they told me I needed to be a size 0. And she was so restrictive. She suffered from binging and just like really poor body image overall.
Yeah.
But it sounds like she's now has a really healthy relationship with her body. She is vegan now. She has a great active lifestyle. And it seems like she's found that balance that she was not able to have as a younger artist.
Quite a journey, quite a heavy journey. This book makes me want to join the JoJo fan club, go to a tour, take my money. I want to support you. It just made me feel impressed and proud and inspired by her strength and her growth through some really challenging times that many of us, had no idea were going on. And for her to come on the other side of all this so aware and so healed is very impressive.
And she, like, just to be clear, like, this is not her saying, this record label did me wrong. My mom did me wrong. My
No.
manager did me wrong. Like, she admits that she cheated on boyfriends. She ruined a lot of her own
Yeah.
good things that were going in her life. And it is a self-critical, but also like very self-actualized look at her life up to now. And it really is inspiring to know that you can look back at a mistake you made, take full accountability, and then move on with the knowledge of what to do better next time.
Yeah. Yeah. 10 out of 10 sparkly microphones.
I agree. But again, it was a really hard read. So
Heavy.
if any of these subjects seem triggering to you, like I was literally walking in public and I texted Mary, I was like, I'm fully like sobbing in public right now.
Yeah. This is not a light, happy read by any means. And there's so many more good little stories and memories and tidbits in there. We can't fit it all in, or it would be a 3-parter.
Yeah. Oh my God. She mentioned like Razor scooters and like,
Oh, yeah. She also mentioned that she was not into the boy band craze. I will.
okay, I wrote that down too, Mary.
Yes.
We needed to talk about that. She said she was really into the blues as a kid
Yes.
and she didn't like the boy bands of the time. But I still feel like we could have been friends.
Oh, absolutely. She would have just like expanded our horizons, I feel like.
Absolutely. Well, Jojo, we're so happy to see you back in the spotlight. She's getting so much amazing attention for this book.
Yeah.
It's so well deserved. I hope you guys all go binge some old and new Jojo. Get exposed to her new music if you haven't discovered it already. And thank you guys for listening. Let us know what you thought about the book if you've read it at When They Popped Pod on Instagram. And let us know what you want to hear next. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.